morning. Welcome to Glass Hurrah Garage. We're here today to talk about the change-up and the installation of our electrical system. Because there was very little room under the dash, I didn't want to put any more congestion up there than necessary. So what we ended up doing was we bought a kit, and in that kit we got a 21 circuitry device and a with our relays and fuses. And that being said, we put it back here in the right hand corner of the car. Of course, that necessitated lengthening all the wires, which we'll show you as we walk through it. But we made a panel up, we mounted the fuse panel, and put that in a side of a panel that will eventually be covered with carpet. And it's inside this right rear quarter panel. While doing that, of course, we got the gas tank in front of these panels. We used a dry cell Odyssey Extreme high amperage battery, and we're experimenting in this car with putting the condenser for the air conditioner in the back in order to also save space in the engine compartment. But also in our future, we expect to have an electric air compressor mounted on top of the battery on a shelf, and everything will be in the trunk, still allowing room for the wife and all her little goodies to be stored in here on short trips. We got into our lighting, we've got all that wired up, powered up, and that takes us, at the moment, takes us from the trunk, and we'll show you the wiring as it travels through the firewall and up through the transmission tunnel, and then gets distributed under the dash to all the end elements at the front of the car. Now we've moved to the middle of the car, which when I do a car, I usually map it out on paper as being the front, the middle, and the rear. We showed just a moment ago that in the rear right quarter panel we mounted our master fuse block and distribution center. Well, of course, going to the rear with a normal kit required all the lines to be lengthened to come back to the front. So obviously we have the rear powered up, which takes into account the gas tank, the rear lights, the turn signals, etc. The rest of the powering system comes up through the firewall and travels up the side of the transmission cover and then underneath the cover over the transmission itself. Now those wires, they power up a number of things. One, we have electric seats. We also have our battery cutoff switch, and then we have some items underneath the car that enhance the shifting of the transmission, a horn, etc. Beyond approximately the middle of the cab, we then travel up the transmission and we go into a distribution of those that go directly to the engine bay that then take care of powering the engine and the starter and those things. On the other hand, the rest of it comes up behind the dash and is distributed between the gauge cluster itself and then our switch for starting on off, powering up the coil, and our starter switch. That being said, I had to lengthen all these, and that presented its issue in and of itself. Each thing had to be pretty well labeled, or you were going to forget from the back to the front what you had pulled wires for. But it got all tidied up, it's clean, it'll be underneath the panels that the seats sit on, nothing under the carpet. You can pull the transmission cover and get to all the wiring that gets to the dash, and the same thing when it goes out through the firewall to the engine. All that's readily accessible for headlights and parking lights and turn signals and electric fans. And that's pretty much it. It was a little bit daunting to have to lengthen all these, but from a cleanliness and wiring point of view, everything is color coded, and a note is made or has been made in order to identify what the wires are for, and that's where we are. This back here will get covered up by a nice panel that will then will get carpeted and dressed up. All this gets some sort of carpet or fabric in order to just make it neat and tidy. The seats cover this area and then carpet the rest of the front along with the transmission tunnel. We're close. We've had the car running. All systems are go. All the lights work, turn signals, brake lights, and we're real pleased at how it's turned out. Well, along the way, we have done and redone and put stuff on and taken stuff off. It's, as I've said many, many times, the building of one of these cars is like a artist painting on a new canvas. And I got down here to where we're ready to close things in, and I didn't like the way my transmission tunnel initially laid out and fitted up. So I built all new panels, and we're just going to lay these in here for demonstration. But that being said, I also made them out of heavier material than I had done before, only because of the not need for strength, but just not having multiple pieces, only using one piece of material for the given. So if you were to back out of the car, so to speak, and need to get to the transmission, the carpets would just fold back, which they're designed to do that. And then you've got 6 bolts on either side, or 5 bolts on either side. Take the shift knob off, take the sock off, release this, take the 5 bolts on either side and begin to lift those out, and you've got everything exposed down to the transmission wiring. That's all been insulated, and in order to minimize any heat. And that said, that's the new cover. And as far as I'm concerned, personally, it's a long ways from the piece of junk that I had built earlier. But I'm pleased with it. It's going to be good. It'll get a little, what we call 2 cup holders and a little ditty box here in order to put sunglasses and that kind of a thing in. Gets a nice leather sock that comes up and dresses the shift stalk up and gets covered in our selection of carpet. Now, while we're here and before we move away, you know, part of the underlying theme of the car was in some part preservation, and that preservation has been certainly a consternation from the beginning, because we started with a painted car. It's not perfect, but that's what I wanted. We started with a dash that had been wood grain, and that rascal is perfect. And part of the hurdle was to not scratch or disturb any of this while we were moving around building the car. And to finish it off, I like the machine what's called metal turn surfaces, and this metal turn surface is a replication of the original gauge cluster with some changes. It's got 5 gauges in it instead of 3, and we used Autometer, Nostalgia gauges. This is a GPS speedometer. The rest of them are well, the oil isn't electrical. I don't like oil pressure gauges being electrical, but we've got the water, oil, fuel, and volts, and they fit nicely right in the original existing opening. And that's part of the nostalgic aspect of the car, is try to replicate things that certainly give you that feeling of going back in time to back in 32 and the 30s and the 40s. Well, one of the things I like about building cars is putting some uniqueness in them. And what we've tried to do here in some part is preserve some of the old style, traditional things that go along with these cars. And obviously the Arden motor, that's pretty doggone unique. And you don't see a lot of them. They're not like the small block Chevy or Ford. And it does give the car kind of a standout. But the other thing is, I love lighting. And one of the things I always found interesting with them is using the Edmund & Jones aftermarket bullet style lights on these cars. These were options. These were not put on production cars. And these were made in 1924, which is pretty cool. And when you took them apart, they got 52 parts in each one of them. So I changed them up. I made an adapter that goes in them in order to convert them to high and low beam halogen. They got a neat little parking light. And then I installed underneath them a little turn signal and flasher light that's about the size of a pencil eraser. And then on top of that, put the one and only fog lamp on them, which has a lot of folklore as to why only one lamp. I'm going to demonstrate these now. First thing I'm going to do is turn on the turn signals. And we got a left turn signal, and then we got a right turn signal, and then we've got our hazard lights. And I'll tell you, those little lamps, if you looked at them directly, you can't see for about 10 minutes. They're really tiny, they're out of the way, almost completely hidden. Then we've got our running lights, parking lamps as they call them, and I changed those from a clear to an amber, and it gives it a nice hue through the double lens of the glass. And then we have our, well, we're supposed to have our, there we go, and we have our low and high beam for the just the driving lights themselves. Now they don't put out a lot of light. They're not as good as a modern day lamp, but they're so traditional in the sense that they're so old, and they're really a preservation of that headlamp of the time. On top of that, we have the fog lamp, and the part of the lore is that this was used if you were going to pass somebody. You were telling the person in front of you that you were coming by, and the person coming at you that you were going to pass the car in front of you. So it was kind of a warning lamp. Of course, they're also for fog, and usually they ran 2 lamps when there was fog, but in this case they only have the 1 lamp. That pretty much covers the front of the car and the lighting. And the lamps are really neat. We'll show you the back of the car too. They're lights that are off of a 29 Packard. I found them a swap meet and thought they would just be cool. What's neat about them is the fluted glass and the turn signals. You just don't see that artistic work in lamps anymore. You see mostly LEDs and just a whole bunch of brightness, but this thing is really neat. Well, we're at the back of the car now, and again, as I said in the beginning, things like lighting really inspire me, and especially the preservation of old lighting. What we first did was, of course, we bobtailed the back end of the car, and we took the gas tank away from here and put it inside the trunk. That said, we've got a stainless spreader bar, and we've got the stainless license plate bracket, and then I had these what they call tag toppers, and I had Brian Truckers make this up for me. It's called the Last Hurrah Garage, established in 1943, and that's when my mother dropped me, and life began down the car trail. The lamps that we have on the back of the car, we have a pair of them, one on either side. These are really also unique. They're off of a 1929 Packard. They're CM Hall lamps. They've got 3 lenses. They've got a backup, and this is for 1929. They got a beehive running light, and then they've got a really pretty amber fluted turn signal. and brake lamp. Again, they're CM Hall. They were made in Detroit specifically as aftermarket lamps for cars. These, like I spoke about the front, these have, instead of 52 parts like the front has, these have 42 parts. And they're very complex, although we have driven around some of the complexity of them to make our lighting work. But they're just so cool, and they're unique. They're just, again, it's a preservation. They're as original, and they're just different to the car, like the Arden motor and the E&J headlights on the front. These CM Halls on the back are unique. Okay, what we've got, we're back at the front of the car, and we're going to do a little bit of analysis of what's in these lamps. These are Edmund & Jones and their original lights that were built in the early 20s, and they were offered as a aftermarket accessory. These were not put on production cars. Keeping that in mind, that lamp only cost $48 in 1923, but you typically owned a Packard or a Cadillac or Chrysler, something of the high-end nature, and when you bought these, and these then made you stand out from your friendly next-door neighbor in his 27 Model T. What I've done here is I've restored these back as original, with the only exception being is that I made a device that went inside where the light bulb was that allows you to put a halogen lamp in it. And I used, from J&P Cycles, I used a motorcycle housing that fit right into the adapter, and that gave me a parking lamp and a high and a low beam. And that's inside the original lens holder. What you're seeing now in this video is that this actually is a little running light, parking light as it's called, and then we have, of course, the high and low beam halogen. In addition to, and in a moment we'll look at these are Kellerman, they're German, and they are used here in this case, as they are for motorcycles, as a turn signal. And these are not any bigger than a typical number 2 pencil eraser, and they're wonderful to be able to hide and put around where you don't want people to see them directly, and on top of it, they're so bright they'll blind you when they actually operate. These lights, going back to the E&J, have 52 parts in them. I have some personal photographs of all the parts laid out on my restoration table, and it's incredible to think back in 1923-24 when the patent was made on these, how intricate these lamps were built for that period of time. They're just as intricate as a Swiss watch, but they're liked by some and they're not liked by some, but I thought it looked pretty cool on this car. We painted in the color of our chocolate brown trim. They're not as, I would say they're not as bright or as user-friendly, but they do look unique and make a really different appearance of the car. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed this episode, walking through the wiring and the lighting of the 32 Ford Highboy. Our next episode is going to pick up on installing the interior. It's in process now. The seats have been covered. We're going to be cutting carpet this week and finaling that out. And we really look forward to that event, because that's going to put us into a position of being able to run the car up and down the road more than what we've done now, and really test the car out. And as a final note, with that happening and we get it out on the road, I'm going to get a haircut. I haven't gotten a haircut since the 1st of March when this virus hit, and I have not had long hair since I was rope dope and smoking back in the 60s. So you all look forward to that. We are looking forward to it, and have a great day, and come back to Last Hurrah Garage.